Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Aimundi Gugliotta. I'm the Senior Manager of Public Affairs at AAA Northeast, and I'll be your host this afternoon. Not the best afternoon weather-wise here in the Northeast. The sky's looking pretty scary out there, so I'm hopeful that we will all have power for the duration of this event. But just so you know, we are recording this webinar, so if you do lose power, you will have the recording for later review. We are now in our third webinar in the AAA Teen Driver Safety Series, and today we're going to focus on impaired driving, a topic far more scary than a tropical storm. So whether you're joining us today as a new driver, as a parent or a family member of a new driver, as an educator, and want to give a shout out to all our AAA driver education teachers out there, or someone who works in traffic safety advocacy or law enforcement, we all know that this is a topic we need to be especially mindful of to prevent tragedies. We all need to work together. And as you settle in for today's conversation, I just want to clarify that when we talk about impaired driving, we are referring to more than just alcohol. We are referring to any substance, whether it's a prescription medication or an illicit drug that impacts you physically or cognitively and impairs your driving. So, you know, we're in a place in time right now where unfortunately legalization and decriminalization of marijuana has made the impaired driving issue more complex. And it's really led to some mixed messages for young drivers. Just yesterday, actually, a new survey released by the state of Colorado found that marijuana use has skyrocketed in just the last 2 years, where nearly 21% of young people in Colorado are reporting use in the last month. And notably, what was interesting was the younger teens in that spectrum, so teens 15 and younger, their use had increased by about 15.5% since 2017, which was the last time data was collected. And, you know, we look at the youth risk behavior survey conducted by the CDC. And within that survey, among the 64.5% of students nationwide who reported driving a vehicle in the last 30 days before the survey, self-reported that, you know, 13% of them had driven a vehicle after using marijuana. So the prevalence of driving under the influence of marijuana, you know, was highest among 12th grade males, over 20% self-reported that. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey for 2019, those results will be released later this month, and we will definitely be keeping an eye out to see where those numbers are going, especially in the states that have legalized marijuana at this point. So lots of issues, this is a very complex issue, as you all know, and we are very lucky that this afternoon we have 3 presenters with us with extensive expertise in this subject. First, we have Dr. Tara Kelley-Baker from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. We have Dr. DeAndrea Joseph, an accomplished surgeon and the Chief of Acute Care Surgery and Trauma at NYU Langone Health. And it's been a challenge. She's lost power a couple of times, so we're very glad she was able to make it on the call. And we also have Dr. Jason Hack, who is the Director of the Division of Medical Toxicology at Brown University. He directs the educational program in medical toxicology as a professor at Brown University's Warren Albert Medical School, professor within the Department of Emergency Medicine. He has a great resume, guys. He's a physician within the emergency department at Rhode Island Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center here, kind of in my backyard here in Rhode Island, and also at Miriam Hospital in Rhode Island. So for the 3 of you, thank you so much for being here. I know many of you made adjustments to your work schedules for the benefit of our audience today. We really, really appreciate it. And we are going to begin with Dr. Tara Kelley-Baker from the foundation. We think, Tara, you can provide us with a really good foundation, no pun intended, to better understand this. And in addition to her role as data and information group leader at the AAA Foundation, I just want you all to know that she serves as a research advisor on the National Board of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She chairs the Transportation Research Board's Alcohol and Other Drugs Traffic Safety Committee. And Tara, please, you know, try to set this stage for us as this problem pertains to teenagers, if you could.
Absolutely, glad to. So let me start with saying hello, everybody. Yes, weather is interesting. I just got through a hurricane and there was no flooding, so I wish you all well through the storms. And I also hope that in this time everyone is safe and well. I'm really glad to be part of the webinar because it combines two of my favorite interests, which is teens and impaired driving. My responsibility today, as Diana said, is to open up the webinar and present to you a bit of a background on the topic of teens and impaired driving. I know we have two great speakers, so I don't have much time. I'm going to talk really quickly, but I'm always available afterwards to answer questions, and even after the webinar, you can get my email address or even phone number and ask me anything you would like. So let me get started. Today's presentation for the next 10 minutes or a little less, I'm going to focus on impairment from alcohol and cannabis, also known as marijuana. There are hundreds of drugs and many impaired driving. For example, many of you have heard about how our nation is dealing with the opioid epidemic. Opioids certainly can impair driving, but I'm going to focus on alcohol and cannabis today because they're the most frequently used drugs according to all the prevalence surveys. So that's the choice for this presentation. Also, for the last part of my presentation, I'm going to go over the Foundation's TSCI survey. It stands for the Traffic Safety Culture Index. And for me, it was really interesting to highlight the differences in attitudes regarding the use of these different drugs. So let me get started. Let me start with alcohol. So alcohol remains a fixed challenge in the impaired driving arena. And teens and drinking and driving is no different than anybody else. Although there was a significant reduction in alcohol motor vehicle crashes in the 90s, the numbers have remained pretty constant over the past 2 decades, and they still contribute to about a third of all fatal crashes. So with regards to teens, despite that drinking is illegal for anyone under the age of 21, there still are a considerable number of teens motor vehicle deaths, even at the 0.08 level. So here are some statistics in these bulleted slide looking at we have about 15% of drivers in the age group of 16 to 20 who had BACs of 0.08 who were killed in motor vehicle crashes. So pretty significant. 58% of drivers 15 to 20 were killed in crashes after drinking and driving where they weren't wearing these seatbelts. So these are important. It's not just the drinking, driving, but they're also factors that really elevate the risk, especially when you're drinking and driving. So you have seatbelt use. You also have speeding, particularly among young males. So 15 to 20, 31% were speeding and 20% were drinking, same simultaneously. And finally, the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of this happens on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and during the time of 9 and 6 a.m. when most young people are driving. So 40% of motor vehicle deaths among teens and passengers occurred between those times. So alcohol in teens, it's important to remember that when it comes to consuming alcohol and driving, that we recognize that impairment begins with any departure from zero. By this, I mean that as soon as we take our first drink, our behaviors and our thinking start to change. Obviously, the extent to which these changes occur depends on a number of factors, including how experienced somebody is with drinking, what they're drinking, how fast they're drinking, if they're eating, even a person's size, age, and gender. Many studies report that by the time a body reaches 0.05, significant impairments can be found, and certainly by the time a driver has reached 0.08, there's critical driving impairment. So drinking and driving for teens is even more significant of a problem. Any amount of alcohol that a teen consumes and then gets into a car increases their risk. And so I'm going to show you an example of this case. So I'm trying to follow if you got that. Yes, thank you. So I know the study's a little bit old. It's about 2000, but a lot of the studies are similar to this. This is one of my more favorite studies because it really highlights how alcohol increases the risk for teens. So in this table, you're looking at drivers' BAC ranges on the far left-hand side by age and by sex. And so overall, you can see that crash risk increases with the increasing BAC for everybody, especially once you hit the 0.08 level. So in the study, they found that relative to non-drinking drivers, drivers of all ages and genders whose BAC were 0.08 to almost 0.1, so 0.99, had at least 11 times greater risk of dying in a crash than sober people. So what is relevant in today's presentation, since we're focusing on teens, is the young drivers. And here I really wanted to highlight particularly that red box really pops out. Here we see that male drivers in the ages of 16 to 20 with a 0.08 BAC had 52 times greater risks than a 0 BAC driver. So alcohol's involvement is severe. It does get a lot of attention, and certainly we've made a lot of progress. But I'll remind you that alcohol is still 1/3 of the motor vehicle fatalities. So newer perhaps, and getting a lot of publicity, as Diana said, is cannabis. So cannabis is legal recreationally legal in 11 states, and it's medicinally legal in 33 states. So according to one of our surveys done by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, 43.5 million people reported using marijuana in the past year. Pretty high. 3.1 of those are 12 to 17-year-olds, so that's about 1 in 8 teens, and 11.8, that should say 18 to 25, so 1 in 3. So we have some significant users, and this probably may be attributed to legalization. Next slide. So cannabis and driving. A significant number of lab-based studies and even simulator studies have found that cannabis can impair our judgment, motor function, motor coordination, and reaction time. The role of cannabis and crashing, however, is really still under investigation. And, you know, so part of the reason for why we can't definitively tell you how risky it is because we really have some limited data. So, and the drug acts differently. So when, you know, so it's very different than alcohol. For example, when you drink, impairment starts almost immediately. We can follow our BACs. When we stop drinking, alcohol starts to go out. But this is not the case for cannabis. Cannabis can be stored in the fat cells for days, even weeks, and it's not necessarily impairing. So it makes it difficult. And then additionally, us researchers really have just limited amount of really reliable data on drugs, keeping in mind drugs other than alcohol. So, you know, most often alcohol is the drug that's being collected if there is an arrest. It's fairly easy to collect through breath, but drugs are a lot more complicated. It often requires obtaining blood samples, it's expensive, and obtaining some kind of samples at the roadside is complicated. So often it's not done. Now, new measures are coming in to take care of that, but right now we still have limited data and limited testing on the roadside. But overall, from the amount of studies that have been done, we're approximating the risk of using cannabis and driving to be about 2 to 7 times higher than being sober. And of course, in combination with alcohol, it's even greater. So cannabis and teens, next slide. So as I mentioned, a number of states have legalized cannabis, and there's a lot of interest in knowing whether legalization is impacting teen use. Studies have conducted to date are really mixed. Some findings suggest that legalization, though, really has increased pattern use, as Diane was saying. And interestingly enough, there's some evidence that legalization is changing age of first use, which is really important because using these drugs earlier causes significant amount of problems. So there are other studies, a number of them actually, who have found that teens view cannabis differently than they do alcohol. And in fact, the legalization of the drug and, you know, the amount of use by other people they know has reduced their perception of how harmful the drug can be, even when it relates to using and driving. So next slide. So cannabis users, a lot of cannabis users will actually report that driving after they're using is safe and or safer than at least driving under the influence of alcohol. And this notion has really been endorsed by teens and young adults. Even my own son had the same faulty thought process. So if somebody who does research in this area and their son and endorses this, you can see that we really do have challenge as far as getting that type of mentality, overcoming that kind of mentality. Increasing number of research is showing that teens and young adults perceive driving after using cannabis as more acceptable and even have less consequences than drinking and driving. And unfortunately, when a person perceives that a behavior has little to no consequences, then they engage in that behavior more often, which creates more of a problem. So next slide. So I'm going to tell you I'm going to finish this up pretty shortly. I want to go over some of those attitudes that we just talked about. So those attitudes that I was telling you about came from other studies, but us at the foundation have been really interested in those attitudes as well. So every year for the past 12 years, we've been conducting surveys to look at American drivers' values when it pertains to traffic safety. So we measure a lot of different things related to perceived danger, risk of being caught by a police, social approval for engaging these things. We look at laws and policies that are designed to curtail different type of risky driving behaviors. And then of course, we look at their own self-reported behavior. So I'm going to go over the impaired driving, but you should know that the traffic safety culture measures many other risky driving behaviors, including aggressive driving, drowsy driving, many others that is definitely worth you going into our website and downloading the report. So next slide. Ooh, I'm talking really quickly, so almost done. Here we go. So in this slide, we're looking at the proportion of drivers by age, and they're reporting that impaired driving behaviors are dangerous. So you can see that DUIC, which is driving under the influence of cannabis, in general is perceived as less dangerous than DUIA, which is driving under the influence of alcohol, or even DUI-RX, driving under the influence of prescription drugs. So although teens perceive it as more dangerous than any other age group, it is still less dangerous than alcohol. So you see the 80.9 compared to the 92.5, and even less than prescription drugs. And unfortunately, by the time teens transition from 19 to 24, you can see they actually are the group that perceives it as the least dangerous than any other group. And next slide. So with regards to being caught by police, so the negative consequences of impaired driving. As you can see here, again, it truly is alarming across all drivers. The perception of being caught for driving under the influence of cannabis is very low, significantly lower than any other impaired driving behavior. Again, you'll see that teens perceive that risk as, they have a higher perceived view that police will apprehend them, but it's still lower than with alcohol and prescribed drugs. And once again, by the time 19 and 24, they become the group, and it switches again, the group that perceives it as the least likely to be caught. So then the next slide, which is our last slide on the traffic safety culture index for today, I just wanted to show you, this is the actual self-reported engagement behavior in these three impaired drivings. So again, driving under the influence of alcohol, cannabis, or prescription drugs. And you can see all drivers have reported engaging these in the last 30 days. Cannabis, though, is the highest for teens and definitely the highest also for the 19 to 24-year-olds. So last slide. So I just want to conclude. I know this was really fast. I hope it was just an introduction. You can see that impaired driving persists. Alcohol still exists as a problem, as 1/3 of our problem. Although teens, generally report lower engagement than other age groups, by the time they become young adults, they definitely increase their engagement. As our nation continues to legalize cannabis, it's going to be really important to consider the attitudes and the perceptions that play in engaging in these type of impaired driving behaviors. So again, I just want to remind everybody that today's focus was on alcohol and cannabis, but there are hundreds of drugs out there, and who knows, maybe next year I'll be talking to you about amphetamines. But today, let's focus on alcohol and cannabis.
Thank you so much, Tara. I want to also echo what Dr. Kelley-Baker just mentioned. We have been running a program which we call Shifting Gears, the blunt truth about marijuana and driving in high schools across our 5-state territory for about a year and a half. We've reached about 30,000 students so far. And we do a pre and post program survey, finding the same thing. The teens just not realizing that marijuana has as much impact as alcohol. They view the substances very differently as it pertains to driving. But what is encouraging in our post-program surveys is we do see a huge attitudinal shift, which is the goal. So I just want to mention 2 websites for our viewers, AAAfoundation.org, where you can access the Traffic Safety Culture Index surveys. It really is interesting reading, and supports exactly what she said about that. We want the do as I say to align with what they do a little bit more, but really interesting research on that website. And thank you so much for all you do. And if any of you as parents or educators would like to see a Shifting Gears program in your community or in your school in the coming year, and we do have a distance learning module. We do have an online learning module for that program if we're not physically back in schools. Please visit aaa.com/shiftinggears. And you can see the teacher guide, all the resources. It has been reviewed by Brown University's School of Public Health, Dr. Hack, just so you know that. They've been a great partner to us in that program. But thank you so much for your presentation. Lots to think about. I'm also the mother of a teen driver myself and have had many of these conversations. Actually, Dr. Hack and myself, we both had graduating sons this year who are off to college, and it's such an important time in their lives. And I want to welcome to your screens Dr. Joseph now. Dr. Joseph, thank you so much, and we're so thrilled that you could get on despite the storm outside and everything that's going on. I did want to share that Dr. Joseph is also an associate professor with the Department of Surgery at NYU Long Island School of Medicine. She sits on several national committees, but I want to mention I love that she's received the Golden Apple Teaching Award and the Humanitarian Award from the Governor of New Jersey. What an honor to receive that recognition. And I just think that those tell us so much about who you are as a person, not just what you do professionally. Last week, one of our presenters, who's also a researcher, said that discussions like these are very important because they remind us of the human side of crashes and injuries and fatalities. And Dr. Joseph, we're in, definite need of an educator to put your educator hat on for us today. Thank you for being with us. And just so you know, among our participants, we have new drivers, we have families of new drivers, but we also have driver education teachers. So what does this group need to hear based on what you're seeing in emergency medicine?
Okay, I'm unmuted, right?
Oh, you're good. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so this whole experience being with the web, it's been, quite interesting. I'm actually a surgeon, not emergency medicine, just a clarification. Thank you for having me. I actually wanted to say hi to Dr. Hack because Brown and Rhode Island Hospital is my alma mater, is where I did my surgical residency.
I did my EM at Bellevue.
Pardon me?
I did my EM at Bellevue.
Oh, so
They switched.
Right. Thank you very much for having me. It's an incredible privilege and for all the wonderful information by Dr. Kelley-Baker. In fact, I've been thinking for a while about looking a little bit more about the marijuana impaired driving. My role here is I've left the stats to the researchers, although I do some clinical research, left it to the researcher. And what I want to focus on is sort of the, as you said, the human side. What do we see? And I've been in this business for a while now. I think I left Rhode Island in 2002 and fellowship in 2004. And the unfortunate thing, I'm right now, I have a teenage niece, and they are invincible and do not really understand the the actions and consequences, and what we see, and we see anything from major head injuries where people are unable to, if they survive, ever return to their usual lifestyle, to spinal injuries, or even things as simple as, say, and it's not simple, say you sustain multiple fractures, pelvic fractures, whatever. And I didn't, I wasn't sure if the slides were going to be too gory, so I chose not to do them. But you deal with chronic pain for a lot of people who are victims of injury, of crashes. They end up dealing with chronic pain for the rest of their life. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but in 2016, the last data that I have, there was an estimated 40,200 fatalities secondary to impaired, distracted driving. And, those are real numbers. And it means that someone knows someone or has had a family member who's been impacted in some way. In addition to the actual injuries that are sustained, the loss of contribution to society, because you're in rehab or you're in the hospital, you can't get back to school, you can't get back to work. There's monies that go towards rehabbing that person, the emotional stress and strain that goes along with it. So I'm really glad that we're doing this, and I'm hoping that we're getting across to someone. Impaired and distracted driving is distracted driving, whether you're drinking, whether you're under the influence of marijuana, whether you're doing your makeup, whether you're on a cell phone. One of the things that has happened is that now that they've taken away and they have the mandated headphones or through the car, people are still texting on the cell phone. I tell my staff and my family I am always available, but interestingly, except when I'm actually driving, because my car will automatically default. You can get these apps very easily. It will default and it'll say, I'm driving, can reach you at another time or something. So that's actually the one period of time, when I think about it, that I'm actually not available, so yeah, and I don't know if that's kind of the idea of what you were looking for, but from our experience as physicians in the hospital, we unfortunately see the really, the detriment that this does to a person, to society. So yeah.
I'm sure you had some interesting conversations with your niece as well.
Oh, yes, she's invincible. I'm sure you experience
Right,
with your children as well. I don't have any children, but yeah, they're nothing hurts, nothing touches. So it's just very interesting until you actually go through the experience yourself. And frankly, some adults are like that. Nobody fully understands the impact that this could have on an individual. So
exactly. We always say, the risk-taking part of the brain isn't fully developed till we're about 24, 25 years old, which explains a lot. And I think in our last webinar, I was saying, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, all I do when I know my son is driving home at night is, check the app, check his location, and the best sound I hear is that car pulling into the driveway every night. And
yeah.
I thank God for that. Absolutely. So Dr. Joseph, thank you. Thank you for all you do. I've heard your name so many times, and you're so well respected by so many. So keep up the incredible work. And, just this topic alone, I think explains a lot about how we are all connected. Just, it's funny how you and Dr. Hack kind of switched places in your careers. So again, Dr. Hack's a double board certified physician in emergency medicine and medical toxicology. Last 20 years, and he's the program director and an educator for the medical toxicology rotation with the residents in the emergency medicine department. And he's also, like Dr. Joseph, both of them honored for their teaching abilities. So Dr. Hack, I'm gonna let him take it away. He has taken an incredibly creative approach to public education on the topic, specifically of impaired driving. So welcome him to your screens now, and I'll let him start by telling us a little more about what motivated him to step out of the box and get people to pay attention to this problem.
Sure. Thank you, by the way, so much for inviting me to participate in this. This is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I unfortunately have a lot of experience with impaired drivers in the emergency department. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So fatal and non-fatal alcohol-related automobile crashes happen every single day, everywhere in the country. I imagine each of you has a drunk driving story or incident, a near miss, family or friends who are hurt or killed by these events. These are lives changed forever by an event that is completely avoidable. For most of us, the most dangerous thing we do all day is we get in the car and we hurtle down the road at 55 miles an hour. We watch out for others and follow the rules of the road, trusting and hoping that they are doing the same for us. It's the modern version of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's unbelievable when this is shattered by a crash, and it's unimaginable when the crash results from an impaired person who got behind the wheel of a car. Every aspect of my life has compelled me to bring focus to these absolutely needless occurrences. As a father, as a husband, and as a friend, I know that through no fault of their own, statistics suggest that a loved one may be involved in an alcohol-related crash at any time. As an emergency physician, I see people who are involved in alcohol-related crashes almost every shift. These oblivious, intoxicated drivers who chose to drive after drinking deny that they did wrong. They slur, "I only had a couple of drinks," or "I was fine," or "I wasn't going far." I also care for their victims, people like you and me who are minding their own business before catastrophe crossed that double yellow line. People whose futures are changed forever because of someone else's choice. People who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I also counsel the families and the friends of the people at the bedside. Though they're physically unharmed, they're often heartbroken, left to piece together their lives in the aftermath. Every single time I take care of these patients, their victims, and the families involved, it breaks my heart because I know it was all completely avoidable if someone had just made the right decision not to get behind the wheel of a car after using alcohol or drugs. Next slide, please. So I felt compelled to find a way to constructively channel these charged experiences and make people aware of what I was seeing almost every day. Because of my limited artistic skill, I'm a doctor, not a painter, I chose to photograph discarded mini liquor bottles or nips on the sides of the roadways. These are small things easily overlooked and ignored, but they represent a huge problem that we should all notice and feel outraged for. I considered each of these discarded bottles, thrown out of car windows likely, tossed and forgotten. Was it an attempt to hide the evidence of a dangerous habit? Was it just another selfish act? Or was it the ignorance of the social contract that we should all be protecting one another? Next slide. Each of these images is titled with a euphemism for being intoxicated: smashed, trashed, wasted, wrecked. These popular terms are used to describe people who are grossly intoxicated, but also to describe destruction and violence. My goal in developing this artistic exhibit is to create and foster a gateway moment for people to recognize, interact, and communicate with each other. Art has a way of opening doors both within ourselves and between friends and families and strangers. If my pictures cause one person to pause and to choose to make the right, responsible decision to arrange safe transport, it's all worth it. Next slide, please. These are some of the terrible and eye-opening facts that accompany my exhibit. The sad fact is I had to select some, but there are hundreds like it. Next slide, please. So going from art to people, why are intoxicants, and by that I mean alcohol or drugs, such a bad mix for driving? It's because being in control of this huge metal object moving at high velocities on a road requires your top performance for specific skills and abilities. And these include your ability to estimate distances and speeds, your manual dexterity, your time perception, attention, your ability to interpret the information that's coming to you through both auditory and visual perception, and your reaction time. And alcohol and drugs, please advance, can affect all of these skills and abilities to a degree that can cause crashes. Next slide, please. So for vision and hearing, which is where is 95% of the information that we're getting about the world around us as we're controlling these huge vehicles come to us through our eyes and our ears. So you have to have the best visual acuity. You have to be able to see things in your visual fields and hear other cars on the road. Please, there we go. And the unfortunate thing is that alcohol can affect your vision. It slows eye motor function. It can alter your movement and your ability to follow objects around you, and can even cause blurred vision and difficulty with night vision. Next slide. In terms of your cognition, this is how you think. So it affects your memory. What do I do in this situation? It affects your visual perception and your ability to see and judge objects around you. It also interferes with your ability to pay attention and to decide which things to pay attention to and which things to ignore. And a accumulation of all of those things, it inhibits your executive skills. So alcohol will decrease your reaction time. It decreases your ability to track other objects. And again, it decreases your comprehension for what's going on around you. Next slide, please. And finally, although there's a lot of other aspects, it will inhibit your motor function. And this is your ability to know exactly how much you're supposed to turn the wheel, how hard you're supposed to step on the brake or on the gas, and your coordination. You can advance, please. For all of these things, it makes the immensely skill-heavy activity of driving potentially dangerous. But again, just going from skills to the alcohol use itself, it's not just a matter of how much you drink. A lot of people will think, well, I've drank this much before. I was able to get home because it didn't feel like it affected me. But there are a lot of factors that people don't realize that can affect their body's reaction to a specific dose of alcohol, right? So not only age and gender, sex, if you, for example, have lost weight, if you've had a big meal or not a big meal, if you're well hydrated, your alcohol intake can affect you differently from one drinking event to the next. Next slide, please. So this is just a slide showing that, fatal crashes occur when people are, at 0.08, which is the legal limit in a lot of, in most places. But these crashes occur at alcohol levels lower than that. So your impairment starts at a much lower level. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. We're slide behind. There we go. So what we have here is sort of a complicated slide. What it's supposed to do is tell you how much you can drink and what weight and what sex. But I think the most important item here is that very clearly delineated is that the only safe amount of ethanol, of alcohol in your body for safe driving is effectively 0. So I'm a big picture kind of guy. So I dumbed it down. Next slide, please. I dumbed it down like this. Imagine you're getting onto a 747 and you're flying with your parents or your grandparents and your children. All of your loved ones are going to be on this plane. And you get to choose which pilot is going to be flying you. So next, advance, please. So pilot A is completely sober. Next slide. Pilot B has had quote, 1 or 2 drinks, or he's only been smoking a little bit of marijuana, but he says he feels completely fine. He's ready to fly. He says, get in the plane, let's go. And pilot C has been drinking all day, but says, I do this all the time, don't worry. I think if you think about it, pilot A is the way to go, right? You want somebody who's flying you and your loved ones who's completely sober. And I think most people would agree with you. And just think about it. If you would want somebody who's taking care of you and your loved ones, and you would prefer them to be completely sober, don't you think everybody else would want one? Want that person, right, around them, completely sober. Next slide, please. So there's one more factor that we need to talk about, which is decision time, right? So alcohol absolutely has an effect on your ability to make fully informed decisions, right? Again, not just skill. If you wait until after you've been drinking to make the decision about whether you're going to drive or not, you've made an impaired decision. So the time to decide how you're going to get home after drinking is before you go out and do it. Next slide, please. So these are my final thoughts. I want our roadways nationally and internationally to be safe for all of us. In this day and age, when everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, there really is no excuse. Call a friend, call a family member, call a rideshare company, get somebody to come and take you home safely. I want everybody to make good decisions for themselves, their loved ones, and their community. Everybody will thank you, because what I never want you to have the experience of is when, God forbid, you make that bad decision, you have a lapse in judgment, you get behind the wheel of a car and you hurt somebody or you kill somebody, and, you know, in other cars or in your own car. This is completely avoidable. We can do it. I know you guys are smart enough to make the right decisions, and I just hope for the best. And that's it. I'm all set.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thanks.
Hackett. I'm very glad that you stressed that. The program that I was speaking about earlier, when we visit high schools, our traffic safety education team, that Shifting Gears program especially is rooted in the theory of planned behavior, as they call it in the public health world, right? So we try to make that really the goal, is kind of, you know, getting young people to get their minds wrapped around the plan way in advance. We know we're all living in a world where hopefully it's not part of their world in high school, but down the road, we've all been in this situation as parents, as adults, where we kind of have to take control and step in or make a plan, sometimes for someone else when they are impaired. So that's really the message, I think, is to speak up, step in, do something if they see someone else ready to get behind the wheel, but that whether, you know, regardless of the substance, if they know there will be substances and driving involved, that they, you know, plan way in advance. And you're absolutely right, with Uber, with Lyft, with cell phones, kids today are in a much better position to plan and stay safe. The other thing, though, that I think is difficult, two things in particular, I just kind of want to open this up to comment for the three of you, that I think has changed considerably since we were all growing up, is that many teens today do take prescription medications and haven't really considered that synergistic effect, that polypharmacy. If they are going to partake in another substance, that they might already be on a medication. Combination could be extremely toxic, extremely deadly, and certainly impairing for driving. So do you, in your opinions, think that parents are actually considering that part of the conversation when they speak to their children about impaired driving, is prescription drugs that they might be already taking?
If I may, so, you know, as a surgeon, one of the first things that I always say to a patient, you know, when I prescribe narcotics before they leave, is do not drive when you use narcotics. And so, you know, whether it's a young person or an older person, I always say don't drive while on narcotics, and certainly don't. I also emphasize the additive effects of any alcohol or anything else on with the medication. I don't want to kind of distract from your question, but one of the things that I wanted to really bring to the forefront is that we're talking about drugs and marijuana and alcohol and so forth causing impaired driving, but I really do not want to move away also from the concept of what distracted driving is, right? So certainly the drugs and the alcohol impairs the response, and there's absolutely it's an absolute disaster. But things like the cell phone or eating while they're driving, I can see teens doing that a lot, and everybody can do it, or even like putting on makeup. I've seen people on the highway going at 80 miles an hour and they're putting in an eyeliner or lipstick. Those things they're all part of distracted driving. I'm reminded of is actually an RN where I was at one of my prior institutions, who basically broke her spine because he dropped something and reached down to get it. It's something as simple as that. So it's so important. I'm glad that Dr. Hack brought out that, it's almost like a weapon. You have this how many pound machinery, and your focus should only be on that, piece of equipment while you're driving.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. And for the two of you, any comment about the prescription drugs and awareness among family parents in particular?
For sure. So any sedative medicine, and there are many, they don't necessarily have to be opioids. They don't have to necessarily be benzodiazepines. It could be as simple as a Benadryl pill, a diphenhydramine, to make you just a little bit sleepy. And then that was on my slide of all of those other factors that can affect you. So now suddenly, God forbid that, that one beer, but you've had a bad allergy attack, you've had Benadryl on board, can act in exactly as you said, in a synergistic way. So you become that much more impaired, right? So again, just, add this to the list of reasons that you should not be drinking almost anything and get behind the wheel of a car. That's the most responsible thing for, again, yourself, your family, and everybody else on the road. Don't do it.
Thank you. And to Dr. Joseph's point, the Traffic Safety Culture Index survey does have some alarming statistics about distracted driving in many forms as well. I can't agree with you more. It's something we certainly need to consider. Seatbelt use, speed, I mean, it's a myriad of risk here. And I just don't want to lose sight of one really ugly number, which was the number of fatalities that NHTSA reported back for 2017, which was 10,874 fatalities. And that's just their number attributed to drunk driving alone. That represents 30% of all traffic deaths. And just so unfortunate when you really drill down into those numbers, 220 of those fatalities were children under the age of 14. So just innocent passengers in vehicles. And I'd like to close, I'm gonna open up to your last comments. I'd like to just close by saying, parents out there, your teens are watching you. So any behaviors that you would not want them adopting behind the wheel, whether it's having a couple glasses of wine at dinner and getting behind the wheel, texting while driving, trying to get away and sneak that call in for work while you're behind the wheel, they are watching you and they are modeling your behavior. And I'll open it up to the three of you for one last comment before we close. Dr. Kelley-Baker, any final words of wisdom for parents, educators?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So, just to follow up on your prescription drugs, I think that's great that Dr. Joseph makes sure that her clients understand the dangers of taking those drugs and driving and mixing them. But our reports, again, on our website show that not all doctors do this and not all pharmacists do. You really have to be vigilant. You need to ask your pharmacist, ask your doctor, ask on behalf of your child, ask on behalf of yourself. Don't assume that it's safe because it's, over the counter. By all means, ask the questions. We've always encouraged ask. So I definitely, I really wanted to comment on that. And, please don't think that your child is not going to partake ever in that. You know, wearing rose-colored glasses is not going to protect your child. Have those difficult conversations. Make time for it. So, because like I said, I was on my way to a MAD board meeting when my son said, I never drink and drive. We always have a designated driver. He only smokes pot. So,
Exactly.
and I'm a researcher in this area. We pulled the car over and had a long talk, but have those talks. Don't assume.
Excellent point. And AAA actually also has a great resource, a website that outlines the implications of over-the-counter and prescription drugs. It's called Roadwise RX. And it's a great database which will explain implications for driving. And in things like Benadryl, I'm so glad you pointed that out, Dr. Hack, because I'm one that gets extremely drowsy from things like Benadryl and should not put that behind the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay, any final words, Dr. Joseph? I caught her on mute, I'm so sorry.
Mute myself. No, I think this is great. Thank you so much for having me be part of the panel. And, you know, I think all we can do is just keep sharing the information and educating. And, you know, it's quite, I think, wonderful for Dr. Kelley-Baker that she was able to find out from her son, oh, I don't drink, but we only do this. So,
Right.
yeah, that's important. So thank you, you know.
Thank you. And Dr. Hack?
So I think my final thought is that we want to be at the top of our game when we're operating these giant machines. And I think we should fully expect that everybody around us is at the top of their game when they're operating these giant machines. And there is not one study that looks at alcohol or drug use that says any amount makes you a better driver. So if it doesn't make you a better driver, it probably is making you a worse driver, and it probably shouldn't be indulging before you do this.
Absolutely. Again, the three of you, thank you so much for your time today. And everyone who joined us in our audience, we want to keep educating. That's really our goal. So again, we will have this webinar recording available. And if you would like more education in your community via webinar, or when it's safe to go back into classrooms, we're happy to do that. Just visit us at aaa.com/community. And across our 5 states, we have a fantastic team of educators at the ready to speak to your teens, your seniors, people of all ages on traffic safety topics. So thank you all so much. Have a great night, and please stay safe out there. Thanks
very much. Bye.
Bye.